Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us for today's session. My name is Firas, and I'm the event planner for Microsoft Reactor in Redmond. Before we start, I have a few things to go over. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary and please remain on topic and professional. This session will be recorded. It will be available through the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. I'll be sharing the link to the YouTube channel in the chat. I'll also be sharing some links to the Reactor meetup page, and I'll also be sharing a link to our survey if you're interested to tell us how you think. Which brings us to our session today. This session will run approximately for an hour with time for questions throughout. Our speaker for today is Sam Wronski. He is a regional cloud advocate. I'm now going to pass this along to Sam.
Hey. Hello, everybody. I am Sam Wronski. I am a regional cloud advocate here at Microsoft. My job is to help empower all of you to build awesome things with Microsoft technology. And so today I thought we would look at .NET Maui. So Maui stands for the Multi-Platform App UI. It's right there on the screen. And so what this lets you do is write cross-platform applications in .NET. So this means you can take your C# code and write an application once and run it on Windows, Mac OS, iOS, and Android. Do all of that. And so it's pretty cool. Last week, I was able to sit down and do an interview with Brandon Minnick. And so we talked a little bit about what Maui is and how it works and why it's so cool and sort of how it's taking maybe some of the things you might have learned from Xamarin or some of that knowledge or from UWP and so on, and wrapping that into a platform that lets you build these multi-platform apps. So today, we're going to dive into building our own app. So I've been tinkering with this. I've done this before, but I don't have any notes. So we're going to learn this somewhat on the fly. And I also want to try to integrate things like the Maui Community Toolkit, which simplifies some of the things that we're going to be doing even more. So we're going to mostly look at how do you build a to-do app. I like to-do apps as UI platforms or as getting started with UI because it teaches you a few different things about how something works. You need some way to accept input from the user in two different ways. You need to be able to enter text to create these tasks, and you need to be able to check the tasks off. Plus, you need to be able to render and update a list of elements, which usually means you need to figure out how to scroll the screen and how to actually build that observable list of things. So that's what we're going to be doing. To do this, I have a Visual Studio preview. So this is Visual Studio 2022 preview. You don't need Visual Studio for this. .NET Maui is going to be in your .NET stuff. Apologies, oh, hey, it's back. Cool. My computer crashed, so I lost a lot of my profile settings, but it's fine. So if you have, not the command, there we go. .NET 6.0.3, you should see .NET new list. Top of this list, you'll see a bunch of template projects that you can use to create Maui projects. The way Maui works, I'm not going to go too deep into it. That video we did with Brandon kind of goes really deep into how Maui works. But there's a top-level framework that you can choose. So it's not just XAML. If you don't necessarily like XAML, you don't need to use XAML in order to take advantage of Maui. You can also write it in other things, and then that gets converted into an intermediate layer and then brought onto each of the platforms so that it all works. So that means you can choose to write it in, say, Blazor, and then write a cross-platform app using Blazor. Or you can do what we're going to do, which is going to be XAML. My background, as far as UI stuff, is WPF and Windows Phone, which I don't do much of anymore. So that's what we're going to be starting with. This is just a template project just to make sure everything is still working. But we're going to just go and create a brand new one. I have this in a recent project because I was just testing it. But if you search for Maui in Visual Studio 2022. This is in the preview. This will not show up if you just have 2022 Visual Studio 2022 installed. It's not in the public release yet. You will see these 3 templates that you can choose from. So we're going to choose an app, which is going to be a XAML-based Maui app. And then I'm going to throw this in here somewhere. We'll do something like that, and we'll do our Maui to do sample. Why not? But just to create a few projects, we should be able to create something there. So what we're going to do is create our project. We get the exact same thing I already had. This is just walking through the new project creation because Andy. And again, I'm still relatively new to this. This is a platform that I'm kind of actively learning. So some of the things I don't know. For example, lots of this is based off of Xamarin, which is not a platform that I used very often. So what did we get here? We have a single page app that is in one project, which is different than maybe if you've previously used something like Xamarin or UWP, where you would have a specific project per platform. That isn't what's happening here. Instead, they're all in one platform, or they're all in one package, project. They're all in one project. And so this code, this layout that we have here is the same layout that's used for my Windows app and is the same thing that's used for my iOS app and for my Android app. It's all the same, and it's all going to run on each of those platforms. So I think what we're going to do is probably take a look at Android and Windows. I hope my Android emulator still works. This is also might take a little bit because it's a Android emulator. So those can take a little bit to start up. So I'm just going to start it. If you're developing with this, I do not, oh, that was quick. I don't recommend stopping and restarting these. Just keep them up. There we go. So this is not the right app. My thing has been running in the background. This is what we're building. So that's interesting. How did that work? Interesting. Okay, so it must have restored it. Because our project is still building. Anyway, I wasn't expecting that to happen, so that's a little bit weird. But once this builds, we should see it launch on our thing. You got a little sneak peek of sort of where we're heading. We're trying to get to what was just shown, but this is sort of where we're at right now. So there's 4 components really that are shown here. We have an image, which is going to show this .NET-bot.png. We also have a label, which is just a way to render text. We have another label in a slightly different font size. And then we have a button that you can click. And if you're familiar with previous iterations of XAML, this gives you another way. Hello, welcome to the stream. So what this is doing is assigning 2 different things that are kind of a useful way for us to interact with this. We have our name here. So counter button is the name of this component. And we also have if it's clicked or not. So we have on counter clicked. This is a callback function that's going to go and invoke some function for us. So the way this is functioning, the way this is working, is this XAML gets compiled into another C# file, which gets mixed with this C# file. So you'll see this is the main page. It's named after our mainpage.xaml, but it's mainpage.xaml.cs, and it's a partial class. So this is actually going to inherit and have access to a lot of those different things. So the on counter clicked function that we had is referenced here. And so when we're telling the button to click it and invoke this function, that's what's happening. It's invoking a function in this code behind that we have. Like it's in the process of deploying this. So that's why that popped up. And then the other thing you'll see is counter button, which is the name that we gave that thing. So we're actually introducing this component, a named component, into this code that we can actually interact with. So this is directly sort of controlling your UI and giving you a way to kind of influence this in a more direct way. What we're going to try to do is pull all of that out and sort of remove all of this and then replace it with a model view, Viewmodel style of control. So there won't be any code in here. This is just going to be an initialized component, and that's going to be it. And then everything else is going to be moved out into its own view model. We can actually control it there. So it looks like it found the emulator and is in the process of deploying it. I'm just going to continue to let that go as we talk through a few more things. And then the next thing, I didn't mean to do that, but oh well. There we go. Okay, so it is launching our app here. So this is the start screen, and it should actually boot. And there we go. So there's a few different things happening here. We have our image, and then we have our two different text, and then we have our button here. Amazing. Quick question. Do you know if we already have the hot reload for Android and iOS simulator? I do not know. So I primarily have been focusing on Windows desktop apps because that is typically what I'm using. So I'm not super aware of the features on the development side for Android and iOS. I'm not sure. That would be something you could test, and there might be. Let's see, Maui reload. For the people who maybe aren't quite as familiar with hot reload, it lets you reload your app without completely relaunching it. So it would give you a way to change code or change UI and get it back. So here for .NET Hot Reload, include support for .NET Hot Reload. I don't see any reference for iOS and Android. I'm unfortunately not sure, Jose, what the answer is there. So give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, let one of us know. I can follow up and push for that. So let's jump back here and just stop this. I'm going to be doing most of the development work for this over on the Windows side. I'm going to keep the Android thing up. We can kind of show that at the very end here. But I'm going to switch back to Windows just because I find that iterates faster. There's less building and compiling of APKs and doing all of that stuff. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. So the two things that we really need to kind of work on here is our main page and the main page.xaml.cs. What I want to do is delete all of this and then replace all of this. So what we're going to do is put a text label at the top with a button, and we're going to put a list below that. And so that's sort of what we need to lay out, I guess. So I'm going to use a grid for this. We're going to do a row definition for that grid. And so what this does is divide a grid is just a box, basically. If you use Excel, same idea. You have rows and columns, and you can divide your elements into those rows and columns or have them span multiple ones. So you can kind of create a table layout. So in this case, we're going to have two row or columns, actually. Two rows. I want two rows. Getting lost. But we want two rows. So we can have our UI element, we can have our text input, and we can have a button to actually do this. And then below that line on top, I'm going to put the rest of everything. So we're going to have a row definition here with a height equal to, I think this works. I haven't tried this. So I'm going to use auto here, which I think should automatically fit and take the minimum size required to fit all the elements in there. So if we have a text box and a button, it will take that and nothing more. And then I'm going to set the height to star here. So that should fill the rest of the space. So we're basically saying all that we need on top so we can fit our text box, and then everything else is going to be taken by the second row. And so what we want to do is move this scroll view into our grid. And then let's position this in a grid.row and set it equal to 1. So this will put it in the second row. And then let's just throw another grid. There's a few different ways you could do this. We could introduce some column definitions into the top row and do some spans. we just do that? I don't actually know. I haven't done this before, so let's try it. So let's do a column definitions. And so this is doing the same thing for the rows, but for columns. So we'll have a series of columns. And what I would like is a column definition with a width of star. So the text box is going to fill the full screen. And then the next thing is going to be the button on the right-hand side. We want that to be the remaining space. So column width of auto. And I think this should cover everything we need. And so our scroll view is now in the bottom part of that. And so we just need to make sure that it actually spans correctly. So grid column span, set that equal to 2. It will fill 2 columns from where it is. So it's aligned to the 0 column. And so we want it to span both of those. So it covers the entire screen instead of just having a weird empty spot. So the next 2 things is we want a button again with a grid row of, I don't even need a grid row. I can just do a column row of 1, like this, and a entry, which is going to give us an ability to enter text. So let's do, don't even need anything here. I think that should be enough. The entry is going to give us our text entry. There's a way to set the type for this, but I don't really know. I haven't used these very often. So not super sure. That's something that we might want to look up quick. And then button is going to allow us to actually invoke a command to insert these things. The other thing is we have a scroll view. So let's make sure that this actually scrolls. The way that I've done this is just say, let's give it a really big height request. So it requests more space than my screen has. And we'll just run this and see what we get. This is already different than the app that I've already built. I don't actually know what we're doing anymore. It's cool. So we should hopefully get an app where we have a text box in the top left, a button in the top right, and then we should have some scrollable content below. That's mostly just going to look like a really big waving purple thing. There we go. And so that's our problem with our button, is that it's too small. But we have this test input that we can type into. And then we have a button that we can click that doesn't have any text. And then we have the fun waving thing that we can scroll. So this is a scroll thing. And all of this would work on Android as well, or iOS or whatever. This all translates directly across. So just by changing that UI, we've changed how this works. And all the old stuff still functions. So what we can do now is get rid of all of this stuff. We can remove this image, the labels, and the button to actually insert something a little bit more useful. So what we want to do is actually have some way to invoke these things. I'm going to actually try to bring in the Maui community toolkit, which should make this easier. I've never used it before, so we're going to learn that live and see how that goes. So let's go and grab some of these. I'm not super familiar with how to use Maui's dependency management, so we're going to see what happens here. But it should be interesting. Let's see here. It's thinking. All right, so while this is doing its thing, let's jump over here. So this is the GitHub page for the Maui Community Toolkit. What this does is provide a series of useful things that you can do with Maui. The reason I'm pulling this in is because we're going to be jumping into creating a view model, and this simplifies that. And so it can get around some of the property change notifiers and things like that are pretty common if you're writing a normal view model that just make it bulky and a little bit unwieldy to actually write, because you have a property and you want to actually notify when it changes. That turns into actually a lot of code. So this should give us a way to actually pull that out and hopefully make it easier. So I'm not entirely sure why it's being weird. Interesting. Okay. we may have to come back to this because I don't want to spend too much time. We'll pull it out afterwards. So instead, what we're going to do is add our view model now, just because we can. So let's do a new item. Let's create a new view model. So this will be our new view model. And so what a view model is how your app interacts with itself. So you have usually some sort of data that you want to do, some sort of logic behind the scenes that your app is actually doing, why your app exists. And then you also have some UI layer that's actually showing certain parts to the user. The data model that you might be relying on may not directly correlate to what you're showing. And so the view model allows you to kind of create a component that represents the data that is drawn on the screen. So in this case, we're going to create a to-do view model that's going to represent this page of data. And we're going to have an iNotify property changed. Property changed. So this should look familiar if you've used XAML stuff before. It's the same thing. And what this is a property notifier that's actually going to say, this component, this property in this class has been updated, has been changed. And so UI that is bound to this needs to go and update itself. The reason that this happens is because your UI in an app isn't like a game. It's not constantly updating the entire screen, because most apps don't need to. There's lots of blank space on my editor, for example, that I do not need to redraw every single frame. We can just use the previous frame. And so what we need instead is to notify it, has something changed? Do we need to update this section of the screen again? And so this gives us a way to actually send those events back to our UI to tell it, redraw this component. So this is our property change notifier. The way I do this is with a property void changed, and then you just give it a string of the name of what it is, and then we can do a null termination thing and invoke our property change notifier with a there we go. So we can just auto-complete that. And so what this is doing is if something is listening to this property change notifier, it's going to go and say, this component has updated with this name. And so we give it a name so that it actually knows which property was updated, so it knows it can map the bindings. And then we just need to invoke this. And I think what we can do, color, is do some black magic to kind of pull out some of this cool stuff. So this is actually going to go into the compiler and pull out the name of the member that's actually invoking this, so that we're going to go and grab that and go and grab that name from the property that's calling this to go and update it. So what this should do is we need to give this a default value. This. There we go. And then we can create a string, and we're just going to call this our to-do item name. Like this, with a getter and a setter. So I will figure these out. I'm making a mess. Cool. All right, and let's create something to store this. So to-do item name. There we go. That's a string. And so what this is going to do is actually update these. So we want to return our to-do item name. And then the interesting part happens here inside of this string. So what we're going to do is if our to-do item name is not equal to our value, I do this just to detect if there's a change. So if our UI doesn't change, if our value doesn't change, then the UI doesn't need to be updated. It doesn't need to be redrawn for something that's reassigning it back to itself. So this kind of saves me if I call this setter with the same value as it was already set to. it's not going to trigger a property notification that says you need to redraw potentially the entire screen for no change. So that's why I do that. And then what we're going to do is just assign that. And then after we've assigned it, we need to notify the UI that it's changed. So notify changed. And so because we have this caller member name, the way this is working is it is automatically going to assign name in this argument list to whatever is the name of the invoking member. In this case, that's to-do item name. And so that's how this is intended to work, is you pass in a name. So typically it would be something like name of to-do item name. And that would go and update that specific to-do item. But because we're invoking it from the same thing we're already in, this saves us all of that, and we don't need to do that. And so what we're going to do is just kind of get this part working, and then we'll attach all the other bits to hopefully add on our actual updatable list of components that we can actually manage. So this is going to be, I guess, our starting point. So what I'm going to do is actually start here and delete most of this. So we're going to disable that button that we had. And instead, we're going to jump into this main page and create a data binding for our data context for this page. Say, here's the data that represents this page. And so the way that works is with a content page, context. I forget the name of it. Binding context. There we go. And that has a thing. So what we need to do is actually manage our XML namespaces. So they're confusing, but this is not that bad because Visual Studio is going to help you out a little bit. So XML namespace is what that XMLNS is in this XAML code. And then the :X in that case is the name. So X would reference this namespace. So what we want is to take our XML namespace. We're going to call it local to reference our local code. Sometimes I'd call this Viewmodels. I don't know if there's a best practice. And then we're going to give it the reference to our local project, which is our Maui to-do sample. There you go. And so this is linking to that namespace, the same namespace our project is in. So wherever your project is, whatever namespace you're using, this is what you would use. And then what we can do is, instead of just trying to type the name of the control, I do Viewmodels for the XML namespace. Nice. Okay. I've done that in the past. I saw local get used a few times, and so I started adopting that. And it's really, I feel like it's a preference thing. And so whichever is clearer to you, I think, is the way you should go. And so Viewmodels or local, or even like the name of the app, if that's your intent, that might work too. So what this lets us do is do local and colon. We're actually able to reference this. This isn't anything different than is already happening in this file. So you can see we have 3 namespaces in this project right now. We have an XML namespace with no name, which is where all of these normal components are coming from. So if you want to figure out where grid is, it's inside of this schema. That's where that is defined. If you need anything in the X directory, I don't think we even have anything right now, you would go there. So that's how you find these things. So we have local, and then we can just give it the name of our view model. So to-do model. And there we go. And what that does is take all of the properties of that view model and expose them inside of our app. So now we have this entry. I believe there's a text element on this. So we can do a binding to the to-do item name, which means when this text entry is updated, any other bindings to it are going to fire that property change notification and go and update it. So we can actually remove most of this. There we go. And let's also bind the text of this label to the same thing. So to-do item name. So this can't be updated. It's not an editable entry. It's just a label. But if we start typing in this, we should see it get updated. And so because they're both bound together, changes to one should cause both of them to get updated. So I'm gonna, I guess, let that run quick. And then the next thing we want to do is actually kind of swap out that component with something that's a little bit more useful. So now we don't have anything. There's a few things here. If we start typing, we can do hello world. And so we get hello world typed there. We still have our button, and then we also get the label to actually reflect those changes. So because one element is updating, the other one automatically does it as we type. So that's sort of the power of a view model and a binding data context. If you actually bind these things together, it automatically does this. The useful thing with the community toolkit, the .NET community or the Maui community toolkit, is you wouldn't necessarily need to do all of this. So it has code generators that replace pretty much this entire thing. So you just use an annotation and you get all of this. You wouldn't need to implement the interface. You just have a property and say, this can be monitored. It also can wrap things like commands, which is what we're going to get to after this. Yeah, there we go. So that's our to-do item name. That gives us a way to actually track what we're updating and writing. The next thing we want is an observable collection. The reason we're using an observable collection instead of just a list or a linked list or something like that is if you have a list of elements that you want to update, you need some way to actually notify that those are changing. We have a property notification changed event, but that is bound specifically to the property changing. And if we're just adding elements into a list, property isn't changing. The reference is still the same. We're just updating the data inside of that reference. And so if you just rely on a list, your UI won't update as you add new elements into that list. Instead, there's observable collections that actually implement these things to actually handle that for you. As items are added or removed, your UI should update automatically. So let's do that. It's a observable collection. Here we go. And this is just going to hold for now. Let's give it a to item view model, which doesn't exist. We'll get to that. So I need to generate this. No, doesn't exist. There's a way to generate. Nope. Okay, weird. To do items. Go. And let's go and more or less copy all of this. We probably do not, because we're not actually going to ever be changing the reference to this observable collection, we probably don't necessarily need to go and have a full property notification change. I do it just because it's safe. One of the reasons that, for example, I do this caller member name or use name of instead of typing a string for the name, which is what is expected. You do that, I've found that like refactorings and stuff can cause that to get lost. And it's not a syntax error if your string is wrong. It's just a logic error, and you're suddenly one component of your app isn't going to update its UI correctly. And that can be really hard to find. So in order to avoid that, having something that is going to trigger some sort of compile error. So name of, if the property is incorrectly named, is going to not compile. Same thing with this. This is automatically detecting the property and pulling that in for us. So both of them do the same thing, and just kind of simplify that a little bit for us. So to do items. And oh, all right. So we need to actually create this view model. It is. All right, cool. So we can go and generate that and get our to-do view model. I'm going to copy this with notify property changed. There we go. But with this, we're starting to get into the point where you might want to go and actually start abstracting this a little bit. So right now I'm copying code back and forth. At some point, it's not doesn't make a lot of sense to do that anymore. I find after you get like 3, 4, 5 instances of the same code, it makes sense to go and do it. One of the issues with maybe 2 is you might abstract too early, and your pattern may use all of these similarities between the 2 things that don't apply to the 3rd thing that you end up needing next month or next year. And that can cause your entire abstraction to need to be redone later. And so waiting until you have this reused code multiple times can be useful. So what we might want to do eventually is maybe refactor out this property change notifier into its own base view model or something, if that's what we're intending to do. But for now, we have 2. I'm not going to do that. So instead, I'm just going to copy some things. So in this case, we have our to-do item name. I'm actually just going to keep that name. Actually, let's just call it a name. That's what it is. So that simplifies our typing a little bit, and we can do this a little bit easier. To name that. And the other thing we want to track here is a Boolean for if it is completed. So we can say like is completed. Oh. And again, the .NET Community Toolkit, or the Maui Community Toolkit rather, would solve this copying and pasting that I'm having to do. So hopefully get this all working. This should be a that's all good. And then we need to fix our name. And then that gets both of those properties into a working state. So we have a name and a is completed on this item. And then inside of here, we have our to-do items list that we can actually insert things into. So what I'm going to just kind of start off with is let's do it this way. This is quickly a sort of hacky way that I do this. There's probably better ways. But the way I found to do this is just create the view models from scratch. You can also bind to things like strings or something if you don't have a complicated thing, because that will be a character array and cause everything to get parsed out. But in this case, we just want to do item view models with name equal to true, it doesn't really matter, and is completed equal to true. And then I'm just going to make another one where it's false. There we go. And so now if we correctly bind this, we should only see 2 elements. So we should see 2 elements in our list. And that should give us everything. I do this because right now we don't have a way to actually dynamically insert things into this list. That's why I'm kind of hacking that together, because we can sort of see that the bindings are working before getting the button click and the command working to actually insert things into this list. All right, so we have all of this. What we want to do is kind of swap out this part with our item state. So I don't actually know the proper component for this. So I'm going to go and try to find that quick because there's a few different ways to insert lots of elements. Customize controls, no. Let's see here, data binding, binding fallbacks. That's stuff for data bindings. Let's see here. XAML fundamentals. Nope. Interesting. Okay. I was expecting to find a series of the controls here. We get the controls with the layouts. That's what we want. Stack layouts, views, content view. Interesting. Okay. Let's go and try some of these. So the reason I'm looking for that is there's different ways to bind these. So we have, that's going to be very small. We have things like a collection view, which is going to show a collection of items. And so our list in the search, maybe. That's a good question. Listview. I think I've tried Listview in the past, and I don't think it worked the way I wanted it to. Because I think it's doing something more. Let's see here. I don't know. We could try that, I suppose. Why not? So let's do that. Let's do a list view. I think a list view inherits from collection view. That would be my guess, just by the names, but I could be wrong. So how this works is we need a items source, and so we want to bind this to our to-do items. And so this is binding it to that list, which means that it's going to iterate and create item templates that represent each item in that list. So we have a recommendation for list and a recommendation for collection views. I think we want a collection view. I'm gonna go with the collection view, and we'll see what happens. These components are going to do different things depending on that. Some will do similar things, but they will do different things. So there's different ways to do like a grid view, for example, which is going to tile items in a grid. So if that's what you want, more of like the classic like Windows Phone style home screen, if that's what you're looking for. Other things are just going to render either a vertical or horizontal list. Others might have additional things. That list view looked like it had things for like pull to refresh and a few other things. So let's try this, and we'll see what happens. We might just not see anything, and that means it's probably wasn't the right choice. So let's do a collection view and give it a item template. So the way this works is we have an item source that has a series of, it has a list of things. And so we want to take that and generate a new item for each of them. And so what this is going to do is actually define what that is. So inside of here, we have a data template that is going to define how to render these components. And so after this, we can just insert any component we want. We can define that how we want it to be. So I'm going to use another grid because I really like grids. And we're going to do a column view with a set of column definitions and do a, what did I want? Column, there we go, with a width equal to auto, because that's going to be our checkbox. And then the other one is just going to have a width equal to star to fill the rest, and that's going to be our label. And then inside of this grid, insert our checkbox, a checked is checked equals to a binding. We're going to bind it to our data thing. You'll see Visual Studio has already figured out you're binding to this observable collection, and it's a data template inside of that. So you are looking at the components of that list. And so in this case, we have is completed and name, which is our contained item or view model. And so is completed is what we want. And then we have a label, text, and we're going to go and grab the name. Yep. And let's put that in column 2. I'm saying number is weird. It's 0 index, so it's hard. but that's the second column. Anyway, so that will create our grid view, and that should render everything there. I think that's it. I think that's all we need. So let's run this. We should see the 2 elements rendered there. We should see foo and bar in that order, hopefully. And then one should be checked and one should not be. We can interact with them because it's just data. So if we want to check one and uncheck the other, we can do that. There's data updates to handle that. So in this case, we can just go and uncheck foo. And so now we have this rendered list of components that we want to enter. Our text box still works, You can type in it. It's not bound to anything anymore, so you can't really tell, but it's there. And so we can check these, uncheck them, and so forth. And now, if we insert things into this list, it should get added into our collection view and drawn there. So that's what we're going to do next. Is we're actually going to have something. In this case, we use something called a command to actually define what things can happen. So previously, when we opened up this project and saw the default template, it was directly invoking a function. What I want to do is actually create a command that we can just invoke ourselves. So what we're going to do here is jump into our to-do view model and just really quickly implement a command. I'm going to kind of sort of hack this together, just because hopefully I can figure out how to get the community toolkit in here. And there's a thing to make things commands. So you can just wrap random actions in command, and it automatically makes it a command for you. The advantage of using something like a command versus, say, invoking an action is a command also, like with buttons, for example, has an is active state. So there's a Boolean associated with this action so that you can actually disable a button. For example, if you need to type into the to-do item in order to actually render something, then you might need to do that. So actually, let's do that too. Let's implement that entire thing. So let's do, we're going to create a command, and we're going to call this our task. And it's been a while since I've done this, so I always get this wrong the first time. So what we're going to do is return a new command, and that has, the first one is just a command wrapping an action. So if you just want to invoke an action, we can do that. I want to actually disable the button if you can't execute it. So can execute is actually going to be, let's see here. It's an action and then a function. So we're going to do this. It's a little weird. But we're going to do a string and make sure this to-do item name is not empty. So to-do item name is, I think there's a string for this. Is null or white space. So if you just start hitting space or something, or your cat sits on your space bar, you're not going to just create a bunch of blank tasks. So there we go. That will create a thing to actually determine if it's enabled or not. And then this other first action in the front bit is actually what we're going to execute when you click that button. And so what we want to do is take our to-do items and add a new to-do view model with our to-do item name. And if it's completed, we'll set that to false. I need to give these names because that's how this works. So is completed equals false. What am I missing? I put this in the wrong spot. That doesn't go there. So let's do that instead. And I don't even know what any of this is anymore. So let's delete that too. There we go. That makes a little bit more sense. So this action here is going to run when we click our button. It's going to go and add it into our list. And so we should see new things get added there. And then the second bit is actually going to go and detect if we can update this or not. What I don't know is if this is actually going to update it automatically. I don't think it would, but that's actually not something I've ever tested. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to add some text to this button to just say create task. And this, or create task, there we go. And that should actually expand it because we have this auto-sized column. It should expand this button and not get pushed off the screen or anything weird. And now I didn't bind that to the button, so it's not going to do anything. Let me go and do that quick. So let's do a command. Buttons have just a command that you can bind to. So let's do that. Binding task. There we go. So that's a way for us to create task. Good call. Thank you so much for keeping an eye out, because I miss these things all the time. So we have our button that should go and get our name, because we're bound to this to-do item. The command should automatically see those get updated. And so we should be able to do this. I don't think there's a very good chance that our button stays disabled the entire time. It isn't possible to click it, just because we don't have a update that's going to say, hey, the command updated. So we'll see. Or it will just let us insert things right away. Okay. This is what I get for just randomly throwing in features. So we can add new tasks. There we go. So if we click create task, you can see it gets this nice animated insertion into our list, and we get all of these things that we can check off or whatever. I don't know why the button isn't turning off. I may have done that wrong. Let me just quickly see here. So our function comes in, string is null or empty. Let's give this. I don't know why we would need this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Of our create task. There we go. So that's going to be giving it the name of that, and that might help us out here. I'm not entirely sure. This isn't something I've played around with too much, so not super familiar. But hopefully, we did kind of get our entire thing working here. So barely. Oh, all right. The button still works. So I'm not sure why that's happening. And I'm not going to fix it here. We don't really have too much time to do that. But the cool thing is, all of this code we've written, the entire app, also works on Android, and it also works on a Mac, and it also works on your iOS stuff. That's why this is so cool. We've just been writing one project. We've been tinkering and developing it on a Windows piece. But if I go and switch over to our Android stuff and run this, a few interesting things happen. My computer is in dark mode, so we've been developing against a black screen. That isn't how this is going to look. So it's actually going to go and update this and adopt the system colors. So it's going to be, because my Android emulator is in a light mode, it's going to go and have a white background. Playing with Avalonia today. Nice. Avalonia is also very cool. It's an open source project that kind of lets you do XAML and bring it to a whole bunch of different platforms. So also very cool. They both, yeah, it's super cool. Highly recommend checking that out as well. Let's see here. This is why I wasn't quite iterating on the iOS stuff. It builds relatively quickly, but then actually pushing all of this stuff takes a little bit longer. So while that's doing all of it, quickly want to talk a little bit about the community toolkit, because we didn't really get to pull all of that in, but it does have some cool stuff. So this is a open source project for actually using the Maui community toolkit, which is a series of things that just make it easier to use Maui stuff. So if we go and look at some of the docs for this, is our Android stuff. There's a few different links here. The interesting one, I think, is in our, what was it? Behaviors. Nope. There we go. All right. Getting lost, but that's okay. So you can actually change how bindings and things work in here. notify. Go. So if we go and look at our that's WinForm stuff. That's not what we want. Really sure. I found this and now I'm lost. That's my bad. Anyway, I'm quickly gonna jump back here and show this because this actually works. And it's not lost in my mind. So this is our same app that we just built. It has the same text box that we can type on. Ask. There we go. So you can do that. The keyboard also works. Ask thing. Sure. And so we can create a task. It's using the mode that matches our thing. Viewmodel base. That's a good call. Anyway, as far as the community toolkit goes, there's a bunch of interesting things that you can do with it. And I've made it work. Oh no. There we go. So our command works. It's disabling the button. I'm not sure what I changed, but it's backwards. My logic is backwards. So we can only insert empty tasks. I can't actually type something out and write that in. Oops. But that's not great. That's not really what we want. But we do have a working app that works on all these different platforms using the same code. I didn't have to go and write some Android compatibility layer to do that because Maui does that for you. Same thing with like iOS and macOS. Those are all just going to work because that's how this is designed. So you can design your layout once and then get it to run on all these different platforms and just sort of build your app. And I think that's cool because I've run into that issue in the past where you try to pull these things in, or maybe you're using something and you need to have like a separate platform for all your phone layouts and then a separate platform for all your tablet layouts and a separate one for all your desktop stuff, and that gets to be a lot. Yeah, that's a good call. Is not is string. Yeah. So what I've written here is you can only insert null or white space, which maybe isn't what we want. So let's invert that and redeploy that, and that should fix it. A good call again. But yeah, this is how all of this stuff works. We didn't quite get to everything that I wanted, so I'm continuing to kind of dive into this because I've been finding more and more fun doing more front end stuff. So there might be more of this. But yeah, if you have specific questions that you want me to find or learn and kind of help out with, let me know because I'm more than happy to dive into them. But there we go. I can no longer create a task when there's nothing here. And then if I test something, now we can insert it. So our button automatically updates. And so this way we can no longer create those empty tasks. So that's how all that works. That's how you do view models and stuff. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about like how Maui works, there is a video from Brandon Minnick and I who kind of taught me a little bit more about how all this worked and walked through a lot of that. So if you want to see an hour about how Maui works, that's a great place to start. Otherwise, there's a bunch of Maui docs that you can find either here or on GitHub. So check those out. Otherwise, if you want to play around with it, it's in .NET. You don't need a Visual Studio Preview. You can use VS Code if you want and just run it directly from your command line. Or you can grab the VS Preview and use that, or any of the other things that support it. Also works on things like Visual Studio for Mac, if that's the platform that you're developing on. You don't just need to build these things on Windows. So yeah, that's it. I think we covered everything. We got it all done. So hopefully that was interesting and kind of covered some of the basics to kind of get you to jump in. It's not a super pretty app, but it covers a lot of the stuff that you might need to do. So hopefully that's fun. Anyway, we have a survey for this show. If you want to fill that out, there's a link in chat, kind of walk you through figuring out whether you liked it or whether we should do something different next time. So if you will fill that out, that really helps us. It kind of helps me figure out what I'm doing right and maybe what I'm not. So thanks for filling that out, and thanks everybody for watching. It's been super cool. It's always fun to have people making suggestions and keeping me on track because I don't always get things right. And so I definitely appreciate that. So thanks everyone. And if you do give Maui a try, let us know. Feel free to reach out to me or somebody else and say, show us the cool things you build. So thanks everyone.
Thank you so much, Sam. I appreciate it. As Sam was mentioning, please, if you have some time, we'd love to hear your feedback. Just use the code 164110 and go to the AKA link we just dropped in the chat. And other than that, thanks again for joining. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.